Hi, I'm Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is Norton Commando 961 Cafe Racer. But then, you probably already knew that, didn't you? Now, with Norton, we're dealing with proper dream bike territory, aren't we? Apparently, although I never met him, my grandfather used to ride a Norton with his pipe stuck into the top pocket of his blazer and his cloth cap turned backwards with his goggles on. Your granddad probably did the same. So steeped is the brand in kind of British motorcycling folklore, whether you associate that with Norton's blitzing round the Isle of Man or the ton-up club, out hitting 100 miles an hour on the North Circular before racing back to the Ace Cafe. It's just a brand that's just deeply embedded in British motorcycling heritage. But beyond all that mythologising, what do we actually have here? Well, if you're being harsh, it's a very crude, very old-fashioned, very expensive bike, perhaps trading a little too heavily on past glories. Short version, the Commando as we now know it, I think first came to being around 2009, and in that classic British way, although it looked beautiful, made a great noise, and there was a lot of hype around it, didn't quite live up to the huge expectation in terms of the quality, reliability and things like that. Fast forward to 2020, Norton was bought out by the Indian firm TVS, who very quickly invested a lot of money, about £2.3 million apparently, in the existing range to bring them up to scratch. On the Commando, that meant changing over a third of the parts, and it's since gone on to pledge £100 million in transforming the production facility and hopefully expanding the range to include a lot more bikes in the future. But back to the here and now. You can have the Commando in two basic forms. You can have it in a sort of flat bar roadster, which costs £16,999, or you can have it as the Cafe Racer version that you see here for £17,499, which, depending on how you look at it, is an awful lot of money for a pretty old school bike with just 77 horsepower, or worth every penny for the way it looks and the heritage that it kind of celebrates. But is that enough when you could have a Royal Enfield Continental GT for about a third as much money, which to the uninitiated, kind of carries off the same kind of look and has a lot of the same heritage as well? Well, at its heart, the Norton is built around a properly authentic steel frame, and it uses a properly old school 961cc twin pushrod engine, and it's kind of mixed and matched with some modern bits like these rather lovely Öhlins forks here and some very modern Brembo brakes. So although it's definitely a classic bike, it's got a few little modernising touches to hopefully make it ride a bit better. But is that enough to justify the price? Because I mean, there are still a few details which are less satisfying, like these pretty cheap looking plastic indicators and clocks, which I think look like they come out of the same bargain parts bin that Royal Enfield uses for the Continental GT and the Interceptor 650. Short version, the Commando has got a lot to live up to, both in price and reputation. Can it possibly hope to do so? Well, let's go for a ride and find out. So welcome to the Norton Commando, and I'm kind of regretting really that I didn't just strap the camera on when I went for the first ride on this bike, because I was so kind of blown away and giddy about it that it would have been nice to have captured just that kind of whoa sensation of riding a bike like this for the first time. But there we go, I've put some miles in since, so I'll just have to try and channel some of that spirit. But what is it that got me so kind of wide-eyed about riding this bike? And following in the tyre tracks of my grandfather, the Norton man himself. Well, first of all, there's the riding position, which is really, it's the most extreme riding position of any bike I've been on yet. I guess I did ride the Triumph Daytona, and that was quite a sporty riding position, but nothing like this Cafe Racer riding position on the Commando. When I first got on it, I was like, why are my knees kind of not fitting into these indents on the side of the tank? But then I realised I had to kind of actually shuffle my backside onto the saddle a little further and kind of really get into that kind of head down, backside up, cafe racer riding position, which is, as I say, something really quite unusual. But hey, it looks cool. You've got to suffer for your art, right, haven't you? And sometimes a little sacrifice is alright, particularly when it comes to riding a bike that looks, sounds and feels as extreme as this. And actually, that riding position isn't as bad as I thought it might be. You know, I was really bracing myself for it being absolutely crippling, and yeah, sure, you're probably not going to want to spend hours and hours on this, but actually, it's not half as bad. And when you're on the motorway getting down into that tuck, resting your stomach on the tank, you can take a bit of pressure off your wrists. So for the kind of the excitement of being in this kind of racy riding position, I think I would take that. I think, although there's the option of the more kind of all-rounder roadster version, I think this cafe racer is the one for me. And just listen to it. I mean, one advantage of Norton's scale is that, as I understand it, I'm sure if I got this wrong somebody will correct me, but because they make so few bikes and because the engine's not Euro 5 compatible, they have to go through single vehicle approval, so that means they can make them a bit noisier than most normal modern bikes. Oh, nice bang there as well, just for good measure. And having ridden so many kind of quiet modern bikes, that really is something, a revelation. And it kind of fits with the character of the engine as well. Because really, with 77 horsepower, it's not about the quantity of performance that you have, it's about the quality. And just the kind of the visceral nature of this engine is just more than makes up for the fact that there's only 77 horsepower to play with. Doesn't matter. Just listen to that. Anyone who says that 270-degree parallel twins represent the death of interesting motorcycle engines needs to get a ride on one of these, because there is nothing boring about this engine. And as I say, I think when you're measuring performance, it's not just about horsepower or lap times, is it? It's about how it makes you feel, particularly on a motorbike. And on this bike, you're kind of channeling that spirit of all that Norton tradition of TT racing, of ton-up boys, all that kind of stuff. It's all there in the sound, in the feel. You know, this is not a refined engine. It's sending a lot of vibration through the grip, through the seat. But that's all part of the excitement. Now, there's an argument about a bike like this. If you're going to go sort of full retro like this, why not just get a proper classic and be done with it? And I can kind of see that point to a degree, because the purists will probably be looking at these big gold Öhlins forks, the Brembo brakes and stuff like that, and going, wow, you know, it's not a proper Norton, is it? Not with that stuff on it. But I think it's okay. I think putting modern brakes and suspension on an otherwise traditional bike, it just means you can enjoy riding it more. And yeah, it's not going to score with the purists, but if that's you, go and buy an old Norton and be done with it. This one I think has enough of the kind of retro riding experience, but with the capability on a road like this where you can actually enjoy yourself and not worry about being bounced off on the bumps or not being able to stop. So yeah, I'll take modern suspension and brakes as my concession to modernity. And really, that suspension is spectacular. I think I'm coming to this from having, you know, my nearest frame of reference is the Royal Enfield, and how bad the suspension was on that Interceptor 650 and how much it limited the bike's ability on a road like this and the amount of fun you get out of it. So the quality of this Öhlins suspension is just lovely. It just floats. It's quite firm, but it's plush as well. It supports the bike, but it doesn't thump the bumps through either. It's really, really lovely, as well as looking nice, obviously, because hey, gold anodizing has got to be worth at least another 10 miles an hour, hasn't it? So yeah, if you're going to spend money anywhere on a bike, suspension's a good place to do it. And actually, if there's one thing I think you do notice, is that the quality of the suspension actually shows up excuse me, I think there may actually be a bit of flex in the frame when you kind of going for it a bit. Yeah, you can definitely feel as you kind of get into a corner and get a bit of angle on the bike, it feels like there's a bit of kind of shimmy through the frame, but that's okay. If you want a stiff and more powerful sports bike, just buy a modern one. You'll be going faster, sure, but you know, I think there's a really nice balance here between honouring the past and the traditions of Norton, but kind of doing it with enough modernity to make it actually more usable and accessible as well, because let's face it, riding an old bike brings with it a whole level of faff, and if Norton really has addressed some of those reliability issues that were apparently on the earlier Commandos, then this would seem like a really nice balance. Another thing I'm appreciating is coming fresh from the BMW R9T with all its kind of electronic throttle and all that kind of thing. I really like the cable throttle and kind of the honesty of the response in that. The BMW had a weird kind of snatchiness when you were in the sort of sportier modes that just didn't feel honest, as it were. But cable throttle just gives you that kind of instant connection to the bike, and it's like everything on the bike is like that. The gearbox, the brake response. I've got to say a shout out for these lovely Brembo levers. The the tactility of them, the sort of skinny levers are just really lovely to use. It's a hydraulically assisted clutch as well, so that means you've got the same levers on both sides of the bars, so it's just all these little contact points, these little kind of tactile contact points that make riding the bike so much more satisfying. And the way that performance comes on, the engine is, in that kind of old school way, is flexible and torquey. So really on a road like this, third and fourth are all you need. It's a 5-speed gearbox. And third and fourth gears give you everything that you could possibly need. And that's another thing about older bikes as opposed to more modern ones, is that the performance is just there at a more relevant range of speeds. The first ride I went out on it, I had a fantastic time. I kept looking down at the speedo and going, oh, is that all? Rather than, oh God, not again. And if you're looking to enjoy your ride, you want to do it safely and responsibly and all the rest of it on roads with cameras and all those other hazards and things that you need to be aware of, the fact that you can feel like you're having a fantastic time, proper kind of life-affirming stuff, but doing it at a vaguely sensible speed, I would trade that for another 100 horsepower any day of the week. And there's the noise. I did mention the noise, didn't I? Oh. Compared with some of the kind of strangled modern bikes I've been riding lately, it just adds so much to the experience. So yeah, like my grandfather before me, I think I may be a Norton man. So there we go, that was the Norton Commando 961 Cafe Racer. Did I enjoy it? Yeah, of course I did, but then you probably got that from the onboard commentary, didn't you? It's just such a characterful and charismatic bike to ride. It's so much fun on a road like this. You know, it's definitely a high days and holidays kind of bike, a bike for sunny Sundays. You're not going to be commuting on it or anything like that, but on the right road, on the right day, yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It's not perfect. There are a few kind of quirks about the bike which I didn't enjoy quite so much. A few things like the lack of steering lock is quite intimidating in low speed situations. You know, you go to steer and turn the forks and they just go dunk, and then, you know, a bit of a wobble when that happens. The side stand is, I don't know, a bit long or maybe needs adjusting or something like that. It just feels a little bit precarious on the side stand, which has got me very, very worried, because the idea of it toppling over and falling over, well, it just doesn't bear thinking about with a bike like this, does it? Also a few things to get used to, like these kind of combined pegs and shifter and brake lever on the other side. You have to kind of splay your legs out to use them. So it's not ergonomically perfect. There are a few things that you have to get your head around when you're riding it, but yeah, that's all part of the charm. Is it worth the money? Well, that's a difficult question, isn't it? 17.5 grand, it's a lot of money. It's nearly 3 times what you'd pay for, as I say, a superficially similar looking Royal Enfield Continental GT, but I think while adding modern bits might not please the purists, I think it goes to show just what advances in things like suspension and brakes bring to a bike. And while the Enfield might have the look and the style and all that kind of thing, I just don't think it would be as enjoyable to ride as Norton has proven itself today. But what about going the other way with a kind of a retro bike that has a few more modern conveniences, like the BMW R12 9T that I was on recently? Well, it definitely has its attractions, and I did enjoy the BMW a lot, but I think this just feels a lot more authentic. Of course, if you're going to split the difference, probably the bike halfway between those two in terms of the kind of retro and modern vibes is the Triumph Thruxton, which is obviously just about to go out of production, but they're obviously still around. I think that would probably fit very nicely, about halfway between the kind of full trad and the modern classic like the BMW, so I'd be very keen to try one of those at some point. Another thing to bear in mind is, although this bike is expensive to buy new, I did have a look used, and there are a few around with very low mileages, one with just 300 miles, which was about 13.5 grand. So yeah, it's an expensive bike to buy new, but there are examples out there which can be bought for a lot less money, and all of a sudden at that kind of money, it's a very different proposition, isn't it? Anyway, plenty to mull over. I hope you enjoyed this video, and indeed what will probably turn out to be season 1 of Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, because it's the summer holidays. I'm going to be away for a few weeks, so there won't be any more videos for a little while. There will be very soon, don't worry. In the meantime, you can obviously hit like on the video if you enjoyed it. I hope you did. Subscribe, hit the bell for notifications of when the new videos do drop. And at this point, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody who's been watching so far. I've really enjoyed chatting with you in the comments. I really appreciate the support, the views, the subscriptions, all that kind of thing. It's really, really appreciated. And I look forward to bringing you some more videos very, very soon. I've got some exciting plans for that, so don't you worry. For now though, I'll say thanks ever so much for watching. Goodbye and ride safe.